Across the vast Iranian plateau, where the harsh sun beats down upon endless expanses of desert sand and rocky outcroppings, where ancient mountain ranges rise like sleeping giants against horizons that seem to stretch beyond the edge of the world itself, there once emerged a civilization that would reshape the very foundations of human understanding about power, governance, and the delicate art of ruling diverse peoples. The wind that sweeps across these timeless landscapes carries with it the whispers of an empire that began not with the clash of swords or the thunder of conquering armies, but with something far more revolutionary and enduring: the radical notion that strength could be found in acceptance, that true power lay not in crushing differences, but in celebrating them. In the 6th century, before the Common Era, as the morning mists clung to the valleys between towering peaks, and the first rays of sunlight painted the ancient stones in shades of amber and gold, a young prince named Cyrus walked among the scattered tribes and kingdoms that dotted this rugged terrain. The air was thin and crisp in these highland regions, where shepherds had tended their flocks for countless generations, where the echo of their songs drifted across meadows dotted with wild flowers that bloomed in defiant splashes of purple and yellow against the austere beauty of the mountains. Here, in this land that seemed carved from the very bones of the earth, where every sunrise brought with it the promise of both harsh challenges and unexpected beauty, the seeds of something extraordinary were beginning to take root. The tribal peoples of these regions had lived for centuries according to the rhythms of the seasons, their lives intertwined with the movements of their animals, the patterns of rainfall, the ancient knowledge passed down through generations of elders who remembered when the world was younger, and the gods walked more closely among mortals. Their tents were woven from the wool of sheep that grazed on high pastures where the grass grew short but sweet. And their children learned the old stories while sitting around fires that crackled with the dry wood of mountain shrubs, the flames casting dancing shadows on weathered faces that had seen the passage of many winters. These were people who understood survival, who knew that in the harshness of their environment, cooperation often meant the difference between prosperity and catastrophe, between the continuation of their bloodlines and disappearance into the silence of history. When Cyrus began to unite these disparate groups under his banner, he brought with him not the heavy hand of a conqueror, but the open palm of someone who understood that true leadership required listening as much as speaking, learning as much as teaching. The young ruler had observed how previous empires had risen and fallen, how the Assyrians had ruled through fear and brutality, creating subjects who obeyed only as long as the threat of punishment loomed over them like storm clouds gathering on distant peaks. He had witnessed how such methods ultimately bred resentment, how the conquered peoples would nurse their grievances like carefully tended flames, waiting for the moment when they could rise up and throw off the yoke of their oppressors, often bringing down entire civilizations in their fury. But Cyrus possessed a different vision, one that emerged from the very landscape that had shaped him, an understanding that just as the mountains and valleys, the deserts and oases, each contributed their own character to the tapestry of the land, so too could diverse peoples contribute their unique strengths to a greater whole, without losing what made them distinct. In the cool evenings when the stars appeared like scattered diamonds against the deep purple sky, when the calls of night birds echoed across the valleys, and the scent of cooking fires mingled with the clean mountain air, he would speak with his advisors about creating something unprecedented, an empire that would grow strong, not by erasing differences, but by weaving them together into a pattern more beautiful and resilient than any single thread could create alone. The birth of the Persian Empire under Cyrus marked the beginning of a new chapter in human history, one written not in blood and subjugation, but in the revolutionary language of tolerance and respect. As his forces moved across the ancient world, they encountered civilizations that had flourished for millennia, along the banks of great rivers, in fertile valleys where the soil was black and rich, in cities where merchants gathered from distant lands to trade in spices and silk, in temples where priests maintained rituals that had been performed since the dawn of recorded time. Where previous conquerors had sought to replace these ancient traditions with their own, Cyrus chose a different path entirely, one that recognized the profound wisdom embedded in the customs and beliefs that had sustained these communities through countless generations. The great king's approach to governance reflected the deep Persian understanding that diversity was not a weakness to be overcome, but a strength to be carefully cultivated. Like a garden where different varieties of flowers bloom together, each contributing its own beauty to the overall magnificence of the whole. In the bustling marketplaces of newly conquered cities, where the air was thick with the aroma of exotic spices and the melodious calls of merchants hawking their wares, where children darted between stalls laden with colourful fabrics and gleaming metal goods, the Persian administrators worked to ensure that local customs continued to flourish alongside the broader imperial structure. The sound of hammers rang out from workshops where artisans continued to practice crafts passed down through their families for generations, while in nearby temples, priests conducted ceremonies according to traditions that predated the Persian arrival by centuries. This revolutionary approach to empire building was perhaps most famously demonstrated when Cyrus conquered the great city of Babylon. That ancient metropolis, where the hanging gardens were said to rival paradise itself, where scholars had studied the movements of stars and planets, mapping the heavens with a precision that would not be equaled for centuries to come. Instead of destroying the city's temples or forcing its people to abandon their gods in favor of Persian deities, Cyrus issued a decree that would echo through history as one of humanity's first great declarations of religious freedom and cultural tolerance. The cylinder on which this proclamation was inscribed, carved in the elegant cuneiform script that had recorded the thoughts and achievements of Mesopotamian civilization for thousands of years, spoke of liberation rather than conquest, of restoration rather than replacement. The Persian way of life that emerged under Cyrus and his successors reflected this fundamental philosophy of inclusion and respect, creating a cultural synthesis that drew strength from the vast diversity of the empire's many peoples. In the great cities that served as administrative centers, where Persian nobles lived in palaces adorned with intricate carvings and surrounded by gardens where peacocks wandered among flowering trees, the sound of many languages could be heard in the courtyards and corridors. Scholars from distant lands gathered to share their knowledge, their conversations flowing like streams converging into a great river, each tributary contributing its own character to the mighty current of learning and discovery. The religious tolerance that Cyrus established became one of the defining characteristics of Persian civilization, setting it apart from the rigid orthodoxies that had characterized many earlier empires. In this vast realm that stretched from the shores of the Mediterranean to the valleys of Central Asia, from the snowy peaks of the Caucasus to the sun-baked plains of Egypt, temples to countless deities stood side by side, their different architectural styles creating a visual symphony of human spiritual expression. The smoke from sacrificial fires rose toward the same sky, carrying prayers in a dozen different languages, while priests wearing the distinctive garments of their various traditions moved through rituals that their ancestors had performed in ages long past, their ceremonies now protected and honored by Persian law. This legacy of tolerance that Cyrus established would become the foundation upon which Persian culture would flourish for centuries to come, creating a civilization that valued wisdom over force, understanding over ignorance, and unity over uniformity. The great king's vision of an empire where different peoples could maintain their identities while contributing to a greater whole would influence not only the Persian way of life, but the entire course of human history, establishing principles that continue to resonate in the modern world's ongoing struggle to balance diversity with unity, individual identity with collective purpose. The tolerance that Cyrus the Great wove into the very foundation of his empire would find its most profound expression in the spiritual philosophy that emerged from the ancient Persian heartland, a belief system that would illuminate the path between opposing forces for countless generations. Zoroastrianism, named after its founder Zoroaster, arose like the first light of dawn across the vast Iranian plateau, carrying with it a revolutionary understanding of existence itself. The prophet Zoroaster, whose very name means golden light, walked among the nomadic tribes sometime between the 7th and 6th centuries before the Common Era, though the mists of time obscure the precise moment when his voice first called out across the windswept steppes. His teachings would transform not merely the religious landscape of Persia, but would cast long shadows across the spiritual traditions of the entire ancient world. At the heart of Zoroastrian belief lies Ahura Mazda, the wise lord, a deity of pure light and infinite wisdom, who stands as the source of all creation. Unlike the pantheon of competing gods that populated the mythologies of neighboring civilizations, Ahura Mazda represents unity and cosmic order, a single divine force that encompasses truth, righteousness, and the eternal struggle against darkness. The Persian conception of this supreme deity reflects their deep understanding of the natural world around them, where the blazing sun rises each day to banish the shadows of night, where the seasonal cycles bring both abundance and scarcity, where life and death dance their eternal dance across the landscape. In the flickering flames of sacred fires that burned in temple complexes throughout the empire, worshippers could glimpse the very essence of their god. For fire represented the pure light of Ahura Mazda made manifest in the physical world. Yet Zoroastrianism's most profound contribution to human spiritual thought lies not in its conception of divine light, but in its unflinching acknowledgement of darkness as an equally real and powerful force. Angra Mainyu, the destructive spirit, stands in eternal opposition to Ahura Mazda, representing chaos, falsehood, and the forces that seek to unmake creation itself. This cosmic dualism painted existence as a grand battleground where light and darkness wage their endless war, where every thought, word, and deed serves either the forces of truth or deception. The ancient Persian mind, shaped by the harsh realities of life on the plateau, where survival depended on recognizing both the life-giving power of the sun and the deadly threat of winter storms, embraced this theological framework that validated their daily experience of struggle and triumph. The sacred fires that burned in Zoroastrian temples across the Persian Empire served as more than mere symbols of divine presence. These flames, carefully tended by generations of priests, represented the eternal light that drives back the shadows of ignorance and evil. The fire temples, with their austere beauty and sacred geometry, rose from the landscape like beacons of hope, their smoke ascending toward the heavens in perpetual prayer. Within these sanctuaries, the Zoroastrian faithful gathered to witness the daily miracle of light conquering darkness, their voices joining in ancient hymns that had echoed across the Iranian plateau for centuries. The priests, known as magi, wore white robes that reflected the purity of their calling, their movements deliberate and reverent as they performed rituals that connected the earthly realm with the cosmic battle between opposing forces. The Avesta, the sacred text of Zoroastrianism, preserves the prophet's teachings in verses that pulse with the rhythm of ancient oral tradition. These holy words speak of the fundamental choice that confronts every human soul, the decision between truth and falsehood that shapes destiny itself. The concept of free will, so central to Persian spiritual philosophy, emerges from these texts like sunlight breaking through storm clouds, proclaiming that each individual possesses the power to choose their allegiance in the cosmic struggle. This radical notion of personal responsibility would ripple outward from Persian culture to influence the development of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, carrying the Persian understanding of moral choice into the foundation stones of later monotheistic traditions. The Persian way of death reflected their profound belief in the eternal nature of the soul's journey through light and darkness. Rather than burying their dead in the earth or burning them with fire, both of which would contaminate the sacred elements, Zoroastrians developed the practice of sky burial. On elevated platforms known as towers of silence, the bodies of the deceased were exposed to the elements and to the sacred vultures that served as agents of purification. This practice, rooted in deep respect for the elements of creation, demonstrated the Persian understanding that death represented merely another stage in the soul's eternal journey toward union with the light. The silence that surrounded these sacred spaces spoke volumes about Persian spirituality, where death was neither feared nor celebrated, but simply accepted as part of the cosmic order that governed all existence. The ethical framework of Zoroastrianism crystallized around three fundamental principles that would echo through Persian culture for millennia. Good thoughts, good words, and good deeds formed the trinity of virtuous action that could tip the balance of the cosmic struggle toward the forces of light. This moral philosophy permeated every aspect of Persian society, from the halls of royal palaces to the humble dwellings of farmers and artisans. The Persian understanding of righteousness was not abstract or otherworldly, but intensely practical, rooted in the belief that every action, no matter how small, contributed to the eternal battle between order and chaos. Persian festivals celebrated the triumph of light over darkness with rituals that connected the earthly seasons with cosmic truth. Nowruz, the Persian New Year, marked the moment when day and night stood in perfect balance, when the forces of renewal overcame the death grip of winter. During these celebrations, Persian families would gather around tables laden with symbolic foods, each item representing an aspect of the ongoing struggle between light and darkness. The sprouting wheatgrass spoke of life emerging from apparent death, while mirrors reflected the divine light that illuminated all creation. These celebrations created a rhythm of spiritual awareness that wove through the fabric of Persian daily life, reminding participants of their role in the cosmic drama that unfolded around them. The influence of Zoroastrian dualism extended far beyond religious observance to shape Persian artistic expression and cultural identity. Persian carpets wove patterns that reflected the eternal dance between opposing forces, their intricate designs creating visual meditations on the balance between order and chaos. The flowing arabesques and geometric patterns that adorned palace walls and sacred manuscripts spoke a visual language that celebrated both the unity of divine truth and the complexity of existence within the material world. Persian poetry, with its emphasis on the beloved and the seeker, the garden and the desert, the wine cup and the spiritual quest, reflected the dualistic understanding that life unfolds through the tension between opposing forces. As Persian civilization matured under successive dynasties, the Zoroastrian understanding of light and darkness evolved into increasingly sophisticated theological and philosophical systems. The later Sasanian period saw the development of complex cosmological theories that mapped the stages of creation and the ultimate resolution of the cosmic conflict. These teachings spoke of a final renovation of the world, when the forces of light would achieve ultimate victory and creation would be restored to its original perfection. This eschatological vision provided hope and meaning to generations of Persian believers, offering the promise that their daily struggles served a greater purpose in the unfolding of divine destiny. The Persian conception of time itself reflected their dualistic worldview, dividing existence into periods of mixture and separation, when the forces of light and darkness contested for supremacy. This cyclical understanding of history gave Persian culture a unique perspective on the rise and fall of empires, seeing political changes as reflections of the eternal cosmic struggle rather than mere accidents of human ambition. The Persian kings, from Cyrus to the last Sasanian rulers, understood their role as earthly representatives of Ahura Mazda, charged with establishing justice and order in a world torn between opposing forces. Through centuries of conquest and cultural exchange, the Persian understanding of the eternal dance between light and darkness would leave its mark on civilizations across 3 continents. The Magi who followed the star to Bethlehem carried Persian wisdom into the Christian nativity narrative, while Islamic mysticism drew deeply from Persian spiritual traditions that understood the soul's journey as a movement from darkness toward divine illumination. The Persian gift to world civilization lay not merely in their tolerance of diverse beliefs, but in their profound recognition that existence itself unfolds through the creative tension between opposing forces, a wisdom that continues to illuminate the human condition across the ages. The spiritual foundations laid by Zoroaster's teachings found their most magnificent earthly expression in the great ceremonial capital of Persepolis, where stone and spirit merged into a testament to imperial grandeur that would endure long after the last Achaemenid king had fallen. Rising from the vast plains of Fars province, like a dream made manifest in limestone and marble, this architectural marvel stood as the beating heart of an empire that stretched from the Indus to the Aegean, its terraced platforms and soaring columns bearing witness to a vision of kingship that transcended the merely mortal realm. The very name Persepolis, meaning city of the Persians, spoke to something deeper than political authority. It embodied the Persian soul itself, carved into living rock and polished to catch the golden light of dawn breaking over the Zagros mountains. Here, in this sacred space where heaven seemed to touch earth through the medium of human artistry, the Achaemenid rulers created not merely a palace complex, but a cosmic diagram rendered in stone, each relief and column carefully positioned to reflect the divine order that Ahura Mazda had established across the universe. The great audience hall, known as the Apadana, stretched across nearly 4,000 square meters, its forest of fluted columns rising like petrified trees toward a ceiling that once sheltered the most powerful gatherings in the ancient world. These columns, each carved from single blocks of stone and standing nearly 20 meters tall, bore capitals adorned with the figures of bulls, lions, and eagles, creatures that symbolized the earth, the sun, and the sky in the Persian cosmological framework. The capitals themselves were masterpieces of architectural sculpture, their double-headed animal forms creating a sense of movement and vitality that seemed to breathe life into the stone. Within this grand hall, the reliefs that adorned the walls and staircases told the story of an empire through the language of ceremonial procession and tribute-bearing. Delegations from across the known world moved in eternal parade across the carved surfaces, Lydians bearing golden vessels, Scythians leading horses of legendary beauty, Indians carrying ivory tusks, and Arabs guiding camels laden with precious incense. Each figure was rendered with meticulous attention to detail, from the intricate patterns of their robes to the carefully observed features that marked their ethnic origins, creating a stone tapestry that celebrated both unity and diversity under Persian rule. The artistic genius of Persepolis lay not in any single element, but in the harmony of the whole, the way architectural mass and decorative detail worked together to create spaces that felt both monumentally impressive and intimately human. The builders understood that true grandeur came not from overwhelming the visitor, but from drawing them into a carefully orchestrated experience of ascending wonder. The approach to the main terraces led visitors up the grand staircase, each step calculated to provide new vistas and fresh perspectives on the sculptural program that unfolded around them, like the chapters of an epic poem written in stone. The Palace of Darius, with its magnificent central hall and surrounding chambers, demonstrated the Persian mastery of interior space and the sophisticated understanding of how light and shadow could be manipulated to create atmosphere. The doorways and windows were positioned to capture and channel the desert light, creating pools of golden radiance that shifted throughout the day like a slow celestial dance. The walls bore reliefs showing the king in various ceremonial poses, receiving tribute, giving audience to dignitaries, or standing beneath the protective symbol of Ahura Mazda, the winged disk that appeared throughout Persepolis as a constant reminder of divine sanction. The Hall of 100 Columns, though built later than the Apadana, represented perhaps the most ambitious architectural achievement of the entire complex. This vast throne room, with its precisely ordered forest of stone supports, created an interior landscape that was both maze-like and mathematically perfect. The columns were arranged in rows that created seemingly infinite perspectives, a visual metaphor for the extent of Persian dominion and the enduring nature of imperial authority. The reliefs in this hall focused on military themes, showing the king's guards and depicting scenes of royal hunts that symbolized the ruler's dominion over the natural world. Persian architectural poetry extended far beyond the mere functional requirements of shelter and ceremony, embracing a philosophy that saw buildings as living embodiments of cosmic principles. The orientation of Persepolis itself followed astronomical alignments, with key structures positioned to capture the light of the sun at significant moments in the solar calendar. During the spring equinox, which marked the Persian New Year, the rising sun would illuminate specific reliefs and doorways in a sequence that transformed the entire complex into a giant sundial, marking the renewal of time and royal authority. The stonework throughout Persepolis displayed a level of craftsmanship that bordered on the miraculous, with joints so precise that no mortar was needed, and surfaces polished to a mirror-like finish that caught and reflected light like precious gems. The Persian masons understood stone not as dead matter to be conquered, but as living substance to be coaxed into revealing its inherent beauty. They worked with limestone that ranged in colour from pale cream to deep grey, using these natural variations to create subtle plays of tone and texture that gave warmth and life to even the most massive architectural elements. The water management systems at Persepolis revealed another dimension of Persian architectural sophistication, with elaborate networks of channels and cisterns that not only provided practical necessities, but created the sound and movement of flowing water throughout the complex. These waterways were lined with carefully fitted stone and often incorporated decorative elements that turned purely functional infrastructure into artistic statements. The sound of water moving through these channels would have provided a constant, subtle music that enhanced the meditative quality of movement through the ceremonial spaces. The gardens that once surrounded the palace terraces represented yet another aspect of Persian architectural poetry, the creation of paradise on earth through the careful orchestration of plant, water, and stone. These paradises, from which the very word paradise derives, were laid out in the characteristic four-part pattern that symbolized the cosmic order, with 4 rivers flowing from a central source to the cardinal directions. The gardens were planted with fruit trees, flowers, and aromatic herbs that would have filled the air with fragrance and provided cool shade during the intense heat of Persian summers. The destruction of Persepolis by Alexander's forces in 330 BCE marked the end of an era, but the architectural principles embodied in its design continued to influence building traditions throughout the former Persian territories for centuries to come. The combination of monumental scale with refined decorative detail, the integration of architecture with landscape, and the use of building as a medium for cosmic symbolism would echo through Islamic architecture and eventually find expression in the great monuments of Safavid Isfahan and Mughal India. Even in ruin, Persepolis continues to speak across the millennia. Its broken columns and weathered reliefs bearing witness to a civilization that understood architecture as something far more profound than mere construction. In the play of light across its ancient stones and the whisper of wind through its empty halls, the architectural poetry of ancient Persia endures, a testament to the human capacity to transform stone and space into expressions of the divine order that governs all existence. Beyond the towering columns and carved reliefs of Persepolis, beyond the monumental architecture that proclaimed imperial might to the world, the Persian artistic vision revealed itself most intimately in the creation of gardens, spaces where the cosmic order of paradise descended to earth through careful design and patient cultivation. These were not merely decorative spaces, but profound expressions of Persian understanding about the relationship between humanity, nature, and the divine, manifestations of an aesthetic philosophy that viewed the garden as both sanctuary and symbol, both refuge and revelation. The Persian garden emerged from a landscape of extremes, born in a land where scorching deserts stretched to distant horizons and snow-capped mountains stood sentinel over fertile valleys. In this environment of dramatic contrasts, water became the most precious element, the source of all life and beauty, and the Persian garden makers elevated its presence to an art form. They understood that paradise itself, the ancient Persian paradisa, from which the very word derives, meant literally a walled enclosure, a protected space where water flowed, trees provided shade, and flowers bloomed in eternal spring. This concept would flow through Persian culture like the streams that nourished their gardens, becoming central to their understanding of earthly beauty and spiritual aspiration. The classical Persian garden followed principles that seemed to echo the fundamental structures of the universe itself. At its heart lay the Chahar Bagh, the four-part garden, where two intersecting water channels divided the space into quadrants, creating a mandala of cultivation that reflected the four rivers of paradise described in ancient texts. These waterways did not merely irrigate the plants, but served as liquid pathways of contemplation, their gentle murmur creating a constant soothing soundtrack that masked the noise of the world beyond the garden walls. The crossing point of these channels often featured a pavilion or fountain, a focal point where the geometric precision of human design merged with the organic abundance of nature. Within each quadrant, the garden designers created microcosms of perfection, carefully orchestrated compositions where every element served both practical and aesthetic purposes. Cypress trees, dark and vertical, reached toward the heavens like living prayers, their unchanging green a symbol of eternal life, and their flame-like forms creating dramatic silhouettes against the sky. These were balanced by fruit trees, pomegranates heavy with ruby seeds, citrus trees whose blossoms perfumed the air, and ancient varieties of roses whose petals would later be distilled into the precious rosewater that graced Persian ceremonies and cuisine. The interplay between these elements created layers of meaning and sensation, each season bringing new fragrances, colors, and textures while maintaining the garden's essential harmony. The Persian garden makers possessed an extraordinary understanding of sensory composition, orchestrating experiences that engaged all the senses in a symphony of natural beauty. They planted jasmine and honeysuckle to release their sweetest perfumes during evening hours, when families and friends would gather in the cool shadows to share poetry and conversation. The sound of water was carefully modulated through the design of channels and fountains, sometimes rushing energetically over carved stone, sometimes trickling gently through narrow rills that serpentined between flower beds. The tactile experience was equally considered, with smooth marble pathways giving way to soft grass areas, and the rough bark of ancient plane trees providing contrast to the silky petals of carefully tended blooms. These gardens represented more than horticultural achievement. They embodied a philosophical approach to living that valued harmony, proportion, and the integration of human activity with natural rhythms. The Persian concept of paradise was not a distant, otherworldly realm, but an achievable state of being that could be created through thoughtful design and patient cultivation. In these enclosed spaces, the harsh realities of desert life were transformed into visions of abundance and tranquility, demonstrating humanity's capacity to work with natural forces rather than against them. The garden became a metaphor for the well-lived life, ordered but not rigid, productive but not merely utilitarian, beautiful but not superficial. The influence of Persian garden design spread far beyond the borders of the empire, carried by trade routes and conquests to distant lands where it took root and flourished in new forms. The Mughal emperors of India created magnificent adaptations of the Persian garden, culminating in masterpieces like the grounds surrounding the Taj Mahal, where the four-part paradise garden provides the perfect setting for one of the world's most beautiful buildings. In Spain, the Moorish rulers who had absorbed Persian influences created their own interpretations, transforming courtyards and palaces with the gentle sound of fountains and the careful arrangement of plants and pathways. These gardens carried with them not just aesthetic principles, but entire worldviews about the relationship between civilization and nature. The spiritual dimensions of Persian gardens reflected deeper currents in Persian religious thought, particularly the Zoroastrian emphasis on the fundamental goodness of creation and humanity's responsibility to nurture and protect the natural world. Unlike religious traditions that viewed the material world with suspicion, Zoroastrianism celebrated the earth as a divine creation worthy of care and cultivation. The garden became a place where this religious duty could be fulfilled through the act of creation itself, where the gardener participated in the ongoing work of making the world more beautiful and productive. Water, fire, earth, and air, the four sacred elements of Zoroastrian cosmology, all found their place in the garden's design, creating a space that was simultaneously practical and sacred. The art of Persian garden design required not only horticultural knowledge, but a deep understanding of mathematics, astronomy, and geometry. The proportions of paths and plantings often reflected mathematical relationships that Persian scholars had discovered in their study of the natural world and the movements of celestial bodies. The timing of plantings followed careful observations of seasonal cycles and astronomical events, ensuring that the garden's displays of color and fragrance would unfold in perfect sequence throughout the year. This integration of scientific knowledge with aesthetic vision created gardens that functioned as both works of art and demonstrations of Persian learning, spaces where beauty and wisdom existed in perfect harmony. The maintenance of these gardens required generations of accumulated knowledge about soil preparation, irrigation techniques, and plant cultivation in challenging climates. Persian gardeners developed sophisticated methods for conserving and distributing water, including underground channels called qanats that could carry mountain snowmelt across miles of desert to nourish distant oases. They perfected techniques for growing delicate plants in harsh conditions, creating microclimates within the garden through careful positioning of walls, trees, and water features. This knowledge was passed down through families and guilds, creating a continuous tradition of expertise that allowed Persian gardens to flourish for centuries. In these earthly paradises, the Persian genius for creating harmony from diversity found its most perfect expression, transforming harsh landscapes into spaces of extraordinary beauty and tranquility, where the spirit could find rest and renewal. The gardens stood as testament to the Persian understanding that true luxury lay not in accumulating possessions, but in creating environments where life could unfold in all its richness and complexity, where the simple pleasure of sitting beside flowing water beneath flowering trees could provide deeper satisfaction than any material treasure. The geometries that governed Persian garden design flowed seamlessly into another realm of artistic expression, one that would carry the soul of ancient Persia into homes and palaces across the known world. In the quiet chambers where master weavers bent over their looms, where skilled hands guided silk threads through intricate patterns, the same principles of divine order and earthly beauty found their expression in the most intimate and enduring of Persian arts. The creation of carpets and textiles became a meditation on perfection, a prayer woven in wool and silk, where every knot tied was a word in an ancient language of beauty. The Persian carpet emerged from this cultural landscape like a prayer rug for the everyday sacred, transforming the simple act of walking across a room into a journey through paradise itself. In the workshops of Isfahan and Kashan, of Tabriz and Kerman, master weavers developed techniques that would remain unchanged for millennia, their fingers moving with the rhythm of ancestral memory as they created tapestries of unimaginable complexity. The warp threads stretched across wooden frames became the foundation for entire worlds, while the weft carried colors drawn from the earth itself. The deep crimson of madder root, the golden yellow of saffron, the celestial blue of lapis lazuli, ground to powder and mixed with oils that gleamed like captured starlight. Each carpet began as a careful calculation, a mathematical poem where every element held meaning and purpose. The master designer, working with patterns passed down through generations, would sketch the broad outlines on paper, but the true artistry lay in the thousands of small decisions made by individual weavers as they interpreted these guides with their own hands. The density of knots determined not just the carpet's durability, but its capacity to hold detail, with the finest pieces achieving counts of over 1,000 knots per square inch, each one a tiny pixel in an image of extraordinary sophistication. The silk carpets of the royal workshops achieved a fineness that seemed to defy the limitations of human hands, their surfaces smooth as water, their patterns so intricate that viewers found themselves drawn ever closer, discovering new details in compositions that seemed to shift and breathe with the changing light. The iconography of Persian carpets spoke in symbols as old as human civilization itself, drawing from the same well of meaning that nourished Persian literature and philosophy. The tree of life appeared again and again, its branches reaching toward heaven, while its roots delved deep into the earth, connecting the celestial and terrestrial realms. Hunting scenes frozen in wool depicted the eternal struggle between order and chaos, with noble hunters on horseback pursuing leopards and deer through landscapes that combined realistic observation with fantastical elements. The garden carpets created entire paradises in miniature, complete with streams represented by meandering lines of blue, flowers blooming in geometric perfection, and birds perched among branches heavy with fruit that would never wither. The color palette of Persian textiles reflected a sophisticated understanding of both chemistry and aesthetics, with dyers developing techniques that produced hues of extraordinary richness and permanence. The cochineal insects that yielded the deepest reds were transported across continents, while indigo plants were cultivated with scientific precision to produce blues that ranged from the pale shade of morning sky to the deep navy of midnight. The saffron that colored threads golden yellow was worth its weight in gold, gathered from the stigmas of crocuses that bloomed for only a few days each year in the highlands around Isfahan. These colors were not merely decorative choices, but carried symbolic weight: red for courage and sacrifice, blue for wisdom and eternity, green for paradise and renewal, white for purity and divine light. Beyond carpets, Persian textile arts encompassed a universe of decorative expression that touched every aspect of daily life. The silk brocades that adorned the robes of nobles shimmered with threads of actual gold and silver, creating garments that seemed to capture sunlight in their folds. Court weavers developed techniques for creating fabrics so fine they were dubbed wind-woven, their gossamer threads barely visible to the naked eye, yet strong enough to drape imperfect pleats that would hold their shape for centuries. The patterns that decorated these luxury textiles often featured the same motifs found in architectural decoration and manuscript illumination, creating a unified aesthetic language that permeated every level of Persian artistic expression. The tradition of Persian embroidery elevated needlework to the level of high art, with stitchers developing techniques of extraordinary sophistication. The silk embroideries of Resht province became legendary for their subtle color gradations, achieved through a technique called painting with the needle, where dozens of shades of thread were used to create effects similar to watercolor painting. These embroidered textiles often depicted scenes from Persian poetry, with lovers meeting in gardens, heroes battling mythical creatures, and wise men contemplating the mysteries of existence, all rendered with a delicacy that made the fabric seem to glow from within. The metalwork that complemented these textile arts demonstrated the Persian genius for combining functional design with decorative sophistication. Bronze mirrors were inlaid with silver in patterns that echoed carpet designs, their reflecting surfaces polished to perfection and surrounded by calligraphy that praised both earthly and divine beauty. Silver vessels bore repoussé decorations of incredible intricacy, with hunting scenes and court celebrations hammered into relief from the reverse side, and then chased with fine tools to bring out every detail. The brass candlesticks and incense burners that illuminated evening gatherings were decorated with star and polygon patterns that seemed to generate their own light as flames flickered within them. Persian ceramics achieved a refinement that influenced pottery traditions from Spain to China, with potters developing glazing techniques that produced surfaces of jewel-like brilliance. The lustreware of Kashan glowed with metallic sheens that shifted between gold and copper as the viewing angle changed, while the fritware bodies achieved a whiteness and translucency that rivaled Chinese porcelain. The painted decorations on these vessels often featured the same garden paradises found in carpets and textiles, but adapted to the curved surfaces with a fluidity that demonstrated the potter's complete mastery of his medium. The manuscripts illuminated by Persian artists represented perhaps the highest achievement of the decorative arts, where calligraphy, illustration, and pattern-making combined to create objects of transcendent beauty. The pages of these books were prepared with the same care lavished on the finest textiles, with paper burnished to silk-like smoothness, and margins decorated with gold leaf, applied with brushes made from single hairs. The miniature paintings that illustrated these texts achieved an emotional depth despite their small scale, with facial expressions of extraordinary subtlety and landscape backgrounds that compressed entire worlds into spaces no larger than a man's palm. In every aspect of these decorative arts, the Persian aesthetic maintained a perfect balance between pattern and naturalism, between geometric order and organic flow. The stylized flowers that decorated carpets retained enough of their natural character to be immediately recognizable, while conforming to mathematical principles that created visual harmony across the entire composition. This synthesis of observation and abstraction, of earthly beauty and celestial order, created an artistic language that spoke to viewers across cultures and centuries, carrying within its forms the essential spirit of Persian civilization itself. Beyond the intricate knots of Persian carpets and the lustrous threads of silk brocades lay another realm of artistic expression, one that captured entire universes within the confines of precious manuscripts. The art of Persian miniature painting emerged as a window into worlds both real and imagined, where the boundaries between earthly beauty and divine inspiration dissolved into pools of lapis lazuli and gold leaf. These illuminated manuscripts became repositories of dreams, their pages glowing with colors so vivid they seemed to pulse with their own inner light. The tradition of manuscript illumination in Persia reached back through centuries of cultural synthesis, drawing from Byzantine icons, Chinese scroll paintings, and Arab calligraphy to create something entirely unique. Master painters worked in scriptorium workshops attached to royal courts and libraries, their brushes made from the finest sable hairs, their pigments ground from precious minerals and exotic plants gathered from the farthest reaches of the known world. Ultramarine blue, derived from Afghan lapis lazuli, commanded prices rivaling gold, while vermilion red came from cinnabar mines in distant mountains. And the most treasured black ink flowed from carbon harvested from burned ivory and precious woods. These artists labored over manuscripts that served multiple purposes. They were repositories of poetry, historical chronicles, religious texts, and scientific treatises. The great Persian poets found their verses transformed into visual narratives, with each page becoming a stage where literary characters moved through gardens of impossible beauty and palaces that defied the laws of architecture. The paintings did not merely illustrate the text, they expanded upon it, creating parallel narratives that spoke in the language of color and form rather than words. The technique of Persian miniature painting demanded extraordinary patience and precision. Artists began with paper made from cotton or linen, burnished to a smooth finish that would accept the finest details. The initial drawing emerged in charcoal or thin ink lines, establishing the composition with mathematical precision. Persian painters understood the power of geometric harmony, dividing their picture planes according to ancient principles that created balance and flow. Figures were arranged not according to Renaissance perspective, but following older traditions that prioritized symbolic relationships and emotional resonance over mere visual accuracy. Color application proceeded in careful stages, each layer building upon the last, like sedimentary deposits of pure beauty. The artists worked with brushes so fine they contained only a few hairs, applying paint with a control that bordered on the miraculous. Flesh tones emerged in delicate washes of peach and cream, while garments bloomed in jewel-like hues that seemed to capture light and hold it prisoner within the painted surface. Gold leaf was applied with infinite care, adhering to areas previously painted with a special adhesive, creating highlights that caught and reflected ambient light, making the paintings appear to glow from within. The subjects of these miniatures reflected the full spectrum of Persian cultural life and imagination. Historical scenes depicted the great kings and heroes of antiquity, their figures arranged in formal compositions that emphasized their noble bearing and divine mandate. Bahram Gur appeared hunting wild onagers across painted deserts, his arrows finding their mark with supernatural precision, while Rostam battled demons in landscapes that merged realistic observation with fantastic invention. Religious manuscripts bloomed with depictions of paradise, where rivers of honey and wine flowed through gardens populated by houris whose beauty transcended mortal comprehension. Perhaps most beloved were the romantic narratives, particularly those drawn from the great Persian poets. The love story of Layla and Majnun unfolded across painted pages, where desert encampments gave way to palace courtyards filled with flowering trees and singing birds. The tragic romance of Khosrow and Shirin played out in scenes of exquisite tenderness, where architectural details revealed the artist's deep understanding of Persian decorative traditions, while landscape elements showed their acute observation of natural beauty. The painters developed distinctive approaches to depicting space and atmosphere that differed markedly from European conventions. Rather than employing single-point perspective, they created complex, multi-layered compositions that could be read like visual poetry. Buildings appeared in cross-section, revealing interior and exterior spaces simultaneously, while gardens were shown from elevated viewpoints that allowed viewers to appreciate both the overall design and intimate details of individual flowers and trees. This approach reflected Persian philosophical concepts about the nature of reality, suggesting that truth could be apprehended only by viewing subjects from multiple angles simultaneously. Portraiture within these manuscripts followed conventions that emphasized symbolic rather than purely realistic representation. Faces appeared in three-quarter view, with features rendered according to established ideals of beauty that transcended individual characteristics. Eyes were large and almond-shaped, suggesting both intelligence and spiritual depth, while eyebrows curved like perfect crescents above. These conventions did not represent limitations, but rather conscious artistic choices that elevated painted figures beyond the merely documentary into realms of archetypal beauty. The great manuscript workshops produced works that became legendary throughout the Islamic world and beyond. The Shahnameh, or Book of Kings, received countless illustrated editions, each one representing a collaboration between calligraphers, painters, and bookbinders, whose combined skills created objects of incomparable beauty. These manuscripts were not merely books, but treasures, their bindings covered in tooled leather, decorated with geometric patterns and precious stones, their pages protected by silk end papers painted with delicate floral motifs. The creation of a single illuminated manuscript might occupy teams of specialists for years. Master calligraphers first copied the text in scripts whose beauty rivaled the painted illustrations, their letterforms flowing across the page in rhythms that echoed musical compositions. Only after the calligraphy was complete could the painters begin their work, carefully fitting their compositions around and between the text blocks in harmonious integration. The finest manuscripts achieved a synthesis where words and images merged into unified artistic statements of extraordinary power and beauty. Different regional workshops developed characteristic styles and preferences that reflected local traditions and influences. Tabriz painters excelled in bold compositions with rich color harmonies, while artists working in Shiraz developed more delicate approaches that emphasized linear elegance and subtle tonal relationships. Isfahan workshops became renowned for their technical perfection and innovative approaches to traditional themes, creating manuscripts that pushed the boundaries of the medium while respecting its fundamental principles. These illuminated manuscripts served not only as artistic objects, but as vehicles for preserving and transmitting Persian cultural values across generations. Through their painted pages, stories and ideals that had shaped Persian civilization for centuries found new life and fresh interpretation, ensuring their survival through periods of political upheaval and social transformation that might otherwise have consigned them to historical oblivion. Beyond the carefully illuminated pages where Persian artists captured worlds in miniature, the same aesthetic sensibilities flowed seamlessly into the rhythms of everyday existence, shaping how ordinary people moved through their days with a grace that reflected the empire's deeper values. The transition from artistic creation to daily ritual was not abrupt, but rather like the gradual shift from night to dawn, where the colors of illuminated manuscripts seemed to bleed into the very fabric of Persian life, coloring everything from the arrangement of household objects to the timing of community gatherings. In the great houses of Persian nobility, mornings arrived not with harsh announcements, but with the gentle progression of light filtering through latticed windows, casting geometric patterns that danced across woven carpets, whose colors echoed those found in the finest manuscripts. Servants moved with practiced silence through corridors where the walls themselves bore painted motifs that continued the visual language of the illuminated page, creating a seamless environment where art and life intertwined like threads in an intricate tapestry. The household awakened to the soft sounds of water being poured into bronze vessels, the whisper of silk garments being laid out, and the distant call of birds in the enclosed gardens that formed the heart of every significant Persian dwelling. The Persian garden, or pardis, represented far more than mere landscaping, but rather served as a living embodiment of paradise itself, where the careful arrangement of water channels, flowering trees, and geometric pathways created spaces for contemplation and social interaction that followed patterns as precisely choreographed as any court ceremony. These gardens provided the settings for the countless small rituals that punctuated Persian daily life, from the morning ablutions performed beside flowing streams to the evening gatherings where poetry was recited under pomegranate trees, heavy with fruit that glowed like jewels in the fading light. Within the domestic sphere, Persian women orchestrated households that functioned as microcosms of the greater empire, managing complex networks of servants, artisans, and family members with skills that required the same diplomatic finesse employed by governors managing distant provinces. The preparation of meals became elaborate productions involving multiple kitchens, each dedicated to specific types of dishes, where the grinding of spices released fragrances that wafted through courtyards and mixing chambers like incense in a temple. Saffron threads were counted like precious coins. Rosewater was distilled in copper vessels that had been polished to mirror brightness, and rice was prepared in ways that transformed simple grains into dishes worthy of royal banquets. The rhythm of meals themselves reflected Persian concepts of time that moved in cycles rather than straight lines, where breakfast blended almost imperceptibly into the social interactions of mid-morning, which flowed naturally into the more formal dining arrangements of midday, creating a continuous stream of nourishment that sustained both body and social bonds. Bread was baked fresh multiple times throughout the day, its warm fragrance serving as a kind of temporal marker that helped structure the passage of hours without the rigid scheduling that characterized other civilizations. The sharing of food became a sacred act that reinforced family hierarchies, while simultaneously creating opportunities for the kind of intimate conversation that built the personal relationships upon which Persian political and economic life ultimately depended. Persian children learned the patterns of civilized behavior not through formal instruction, but through absorption, watching as their elders demonstrated the proper ways to receive guests, the correct postures for prayer, and the subtle gestures that communicated respect, affection, or social distance without the need for words. Games played in garden courtyards taught lessons about strategy and patience that would serve well in later political careers, while the memorization of poetry developed the verbal skills that every educated Persian was expected to possess. The boundaries between education and entertainment dissolved in environments where learning occurred through participation in activities that were simultaneously pleasurable and instructive. Evening brought its own set of rituals that transformed Persian households into theatres for the performance of family and community identity, where the lighting of oil lamps created intimate spaces within larger architectural frameworks designed to accommodate both privacy and sociability. Carpets that had remained rolled during the heat of the day were unfurled across courtyards, creating outdoor rooms where multiple generations gathered to share meals that could extend for hours, punctuated by storytelling, musical performances, and the kind of leisurely conversation that allowed complex family politics to be negotiated with grace and subtlety. The Persian appreciation for luxury expressed itself not through ostentation, but through attention to details that enhanced the sensory experience of daily life, where even the simplest activities were elevated through the use of materials and techniques that reflected the empire's vast trading networks and sophisticated craft traditions. Water was served in vessels whose surfaces had been decorated with patterns that caught and reflected lamplight, creating miniature light shows that turned the simple act of drinking into a moment of aesthetic appreciation. Clothing was chosen not merely for protection or status display, but for the way certain fabrics felt against skin, the manner in which particular colors complemented the lighting conditions of different times of day, and the subtle sounds that silk made when the wearer moved through space. The integration of religious observance into daily routines occurred so naturally that the boundaries between sacred and secular time became almost invisible, with prayers offered at moments determined not by rigid schedules, but by the natural rhythms of light, weather, and personal inclination. Fire altars, maintained in private homes, created focal points for contemplation that functioned throughout the day, their flames providing both practical illumination and spiritual symbolism that connected individual households to the cosmic order that Zoroastrian teaching promised to reveal to those who lived with proper attention to truth and beauty. Persian concepts of hospitality transformed even casual social interactions into elaborate performances, where the roles of host and guest were governed by protocols that had evolved over centuries to create maximum opportunities for the kind of mutual pleasure that strengthened the social fabric of communities spread across vast geographical distances. The arrival of unexpected visitors was treated not as an interruption, but as an opportunity to demonstrate the household's readiness to embrace the unpredictable gifts that life offered to those who remained open to surprise and generous in their responses to human need. Market days brought entire communities together in spaces that functioned simultaneously as economic centers and social theaters, where the purchase of goods became secondary to the exchange of news, gossip, and the kind of casual conversation that maintained the invisible networks through which Persian society actually functioned. Merchants displayed their wares with the same attention to visual harmony that characterized the arrangement of objects in private homes, creating environments where commerce took place within frameworks of beauty that elevated even mundane transactions into opportunities for aesthetic appreciation and social connection. The evening hours, when households settled into the quiet activities that prepared minds and bodies for sleep, saw the emergence of the most intimate aspects of Persian daily life, where family members gathered in smaller groups for the kind of personal conversation that built the emotional bonds upon which all larger social structures ultimately depended. Stories were shared that connected present experiences to ancestral wisdom. Songs were sung that carried cultural knowledge across generations, and the simple pleasure of being together in comfortable surroundings created the foundation for the sense of belonging that made Persian civilization resilient enough to survive centuries of political upheaval while maintaining its essential character and values. Within these rhythms of daily existence, something even more profound stirred in the Persian soul, a deep appreciation for the artistry of language and the pursuit of beauty through verse. Poetry flowed through Persian culture like the mountain streams that nourished their gardens, carrying with it the accumulated wisdom of generations and the eternal human longing for meaning beyond the material world. The Persian language itself seemed crafted for poetry, with its flowing syllables and rich metaphorical possibilities, creating a natural vessel for the expression of both earthly love and divine mystery. In the courts of kings and the modest homes of merchants alike, poetry held a place of reverence that elevated it far beyond mere entertainment. The recitation of verses marked important occasions, from the celebration of births to the solemnization of marriages, while the memorization of classical poems became an essential part of education for both young men and women. The Persian tradition recognized poetry not simply as decoration for life, but as a fundamental way of understanding existence itself, a means of capturing truths that ordinary speech could never convey. The great poets emerged from this fertile cultural soil, like rare flowers blooming in a carefully tended garden. Omar Khayyam, the mathematician, philosopher, poet, wove together observations of the natural world with profound meditations on the fleeting nature of human existence, his verses dancing between celebration and melancholy with the grace of autumn leaves caught in a gentle wind. His poetry spoke of roses and wine, of love and loss, but always with an underlying current of philosophical inquiry that reflected the Persian mind's perpetual questioning of life's deepest mysteries. Hafez, the beloved singer of Shiraz, crafted verses that sparkled like jewels held up to candlelight, each facet reflecting a different aspect of human experience. His poetry celebrated the tavern and the mosque with equal reverence, understanding that the search for truth could be found in both earthly pleasure and spiritual devotion. The Persian appreciation for this dual nature of existence, the sacred and the secular intertwined like lovers in an eternal embrace, found its perfect expression in Hafez's lyrical compositions, which could be read simultaneously as love songs to earthly beauty and mystical prayers to the divine. Ferdowsi, the epic chronicler of Persian glory, spent decades weaving together the mythical and historical threads of his people's past into the magnificent tapestry of the Shahnameh. This monumental work became far more than a collection of stories. It served as the repository of Persian identity, preserving within its verses the values, ideals, and cultural memory that defined what it meant to be Persian. Every tale within the epic reinforced the Persian celebration of heroic virtue, the triumph of good over evil, and the eternal struggle between light and darkness that the followers of Zoroaster understood as the fundamental pattern of existence. The Persian literary tradition recognized beauty not merely as aesthetic pleasure, but as a pathway to wisdom and spiritual understanding. Poetry became a bridge between the visible and invisible worlds, allowing the human heart to glimpse truths that lay beyond the reach of rational analysis. This understanding permeated Persian culture so thoroughly that even the most practical aspects of life, trade negotiations, political correspondence, diplomatic exchanges, were often conducted through the medium of verse, as if the musical quality of poetry could somehow elevate even mundane transactions to a higher plane of meaning. Within Persian households, the evening recitation of poetry created moments of shared transcendence that bound families together across generations. Grandparents passed down not only the words of classical verses, but the subtle art of their interpretation, teaching children to hear the multiple layers of meaning that distinguished truly great poetry from mere versification. The Persian ear became trained to appreciate the intricate balance between form and content, the way that rhythm and rhyme could enhance meaning rather than constraining it, creating a cultural aesthetic that valued sophistication without sacrificing emotional authenticity. The mystical dimensions of Persian poetry reflected the deep spiritual currents that flowed through the culture's religious life. Rumi, perhaps the most universally beloved of Persian poets, transformed the ecstatic experiences of Sufi worship into verses that captured the soul's longing for union with the divine. His poetry danced with the same abandon as the whirling dervishes, each line spinning the reader deeper into states of spiritual intoxication that transcended the boundaries between self and cosmos. The Persian understanding of poetry as a form of prayer, a means of approaching the infinite through the careful arrangement of finite words, found its highest expression in these mystical compositions. The celebration of wine in Persian poetry carried meanings that extended far beyond literal intoxication, becoming instead a complex metaphor for spiritual enlightenment and the dissolution of the ego's boundaries. The Persian poetic tradition understood that certain truths could only be approached obliquely, through symbol and suggestion, rather than direct statement, and wine became one of the most powerful symbols in this sophisticated literary code. The tavern represented the place where conventional social restrictions dissolved, allowing for authentic encounters with both human and divine love. Persian poetry also celebrated the natural world with an intensity that reflected the culture's deep appreciation for gardens, flowers, and the changing seasons. The rose became not merely a flower, but a symbol of divine beauty, while the nightingale represented the soul's passionate longing for union with that beauty. Spring's arrival was greeted not just as a seasonal change, but as an annual reminder of renewal and hope, with poets crafting elaborate verses that captured every subtle transformation in the landscape as winter's grip gradually loosened. The Persian literary tradition recognized that wisdom often came disguised as entertainment, and many poems that appeared to celebrate earthly pleasures actually conveyed profound philosophical teachings about the nature of existence, the importance of living fully in the present moment, and the ultimate unity underlying apparent diversity. This sophisticated approach to meaning allowed Persian poetry to operate on multiple levels simultaneously, speaking to readers of varying degrees of spiritual and intellectual development, while maintaining its essential accessibility to the human heart. The recitation of poetry in Persian culture became a highly developed art form, with skilled reciters training their voices to bring out the musical qualities inherent in the verses. The rhythm of Persian poetry matched the natural cadences of the language, creating a hypnotic effect that allowed listeners to enter into meditative states where the boundaries between reader, poem, and audience dissolved into a shared experience of beauty and meaning. The Persian celebration of poetry extended beyond the purely literary into the realm of calligraphy, where the visual beauty of written words became another form of artistic expression. Master calligraphers spent years perfecting their ability to transform verses into visual compositions that enhanced the poetry's meaning through the elegant arrangement of curves and lines, creating manuscripts that served simultaneously as literature and visual art, embodying the Persian understanding that all forms of beauty ultimately derive from the same divine source. Through poetry, Persian culture maintained its connection to timeless truths while adapting to changing historical circumstances, ensuring that the wisdom of earlier generations continued to flow like an underground river through the consciousness of each new age, nourishing the souls of those who opened themselves to its transformative power. The verses of Hafez and the mystical poetry of Rumi flowed through Persian culture like water through ancient irrigation channels, nourishing not only the intellectual landscape, but also the rhythmic cycles of celebration that marked the passage of time. The Persian calendar breathed with the seasons, each month carrying its own constellation of festivals and ceremonies that connected the earthly realm to the cosmic order above. These were not mere celebrations, but sacred observances that wove together the threads of religion, agriculture, astronomy, and community into a tapestry of meaning that stretched across millennia. The crown jewel of Persian festivals emerged with the spring equinox, when Nowruz painted the landscape in tender greens and brought forth the first whispered promises of renewal. This ancient celebration, older than recorded history itself, transformed Persian households into theatres of preparation and anticipation. Families spent weeks cleaning every corner of their homes, not merely as a practical exercise, but as a spiritual purification that prepared the domestic space to receive the blessings of the new year. The ritual of Hune Tekuni, or house shaking, involved turning each room inside out, washing carpets under running water, and polishing brass and copper until they gleamed like captured sunlight. The centerpiece of Nowruz preparation was the creation of the Haft Scene table, a ceremonial arrangement of 7 items beginning with the Persian letter Sin. Each element carried layers of symbolism that connected the physical world to deeper spiritual truths. Sabza, tender green sprouts grown in shallow dishes, represented rebirth and the miracle of life emerging from dormant seeds. Samanu, a sweet paste made from wheat germ, spoke of patience and the slow transformation that turns grain into nourishment. Sir, fresh garlic, offered protection against evil, while Senjed, dried oleaster fruit, symbolized love and affection. Sirke, vinegar, brought patience and wisdom, while Seb, bright red apples, promised beauty and health. Finally, sumac berries added their deep burgundy color, representing the triumph of light over darkness. The 13 days of Nowruz celebrations unfolded like chapters in an ancient story, each day carrying its own customs and significance. Families visited elders in order of age, paying respect to the wisdom of years, while children received gifts of newly minted coins. The air filled with the smoke of wild rue burned to ward off the evil eye, its pungent scent mingling with the aroma of rice pudding and the delicate perfume of rosewater sprinkled on guests. On the 13th day, Sizda Badar, entire communities migrated to parks and countryside, carrying their sabzeh to throw into flowing water, symbolically casting away the potential for bad luck in the year ahead. As spring deepened into summer, the festival of Tirgan honored the divinity of water and rain. Communities gathered near rivers and springs, sprinkling water on one another with willow branches while reciting prayers for abundance. The celebration carried echoes of ancient fire worship, with bonfires lit on hilltops to honor Tishtria, the star deity associated with rainfall and fertility. Young women tied rainbow-colored ribbons to their wrists, making wishes that would supposedly be granted if the ribbons fell off naturally before the next Tirgan arrived. The height of summer brought Jashna Merigan, the festival of Mer, honoring the ancient deity of covenants, light, and friendship. This autumnal celebration rivaled Nowruz in its importance, marking the time when the first wine was pressed from ripe grapes and the harvest moon illuminated fields heavy with grain. Tables groaned under displays of pomegranates, their ruby seeds spilling like scattered garnets, while quinces perfumed rooms with their honeyed fragrance. Families exchanged gifts of mirrors, coins, and rosewater, each present carrying wishes for reflection, prosperity, and sweetness in the months ahead. The winter solstice summoned the ancient festival of Yalda, when Persian families gathered through the longest night to ensure the sun's return. Grandmothers brought out volumes of Hafez, opening them randomly to divine the family's fortune in the coming year. The night air grew thick with the smoke of braziers loaded with frankincense and dried rue, while tables displayed the crimson abundance of pomegranates and watermelons. Their summer-red flesh, a defiant celebration of life's warmth amid winter's grip. Stories flowed like wine, connecting the present generation to ancestors who had performed the same rituals under the same constellations centuries before. Religious ceremonies punctuated the calendar with their own sacred rhythms, particularly during the holy month of Muharram, when Shia communities transformed Persian cities into theatres of collective mourning. The days leading to Ashura saw the construction of elaborate taziyah stages, where passion plays reenacted the martyrdom of Hussein with haunting music and stylized gestures that reduced audiences to tears. Processions wound through narrow streets, participants beating their chests in rhythmic lamentations, while black banners rippled overhead like ravens' wings. Communal kitchens prepared massive cauldrons of food, distributed freely to anyone who approached, transforming grief into an act of shared humanity. The celebration of religious festivals extended beyond Islamic observances to include the ancient Zoroastrian fire festivals that still flickered in Persian consciousness. Shahar-Shanbe Suri, the festival of fire, arrived on the last Wednesday before Nowruz, when communities built bonfires in streets and courtyards. Participants leaped over the flames, chanting ancient formulas that asked the fire to take their pallor and sickness while giving them its warmth and strength. Children ran through neighborhoods banging pots and spoons, creating a symphony of metallic percussion that was believed to chase away evil spirits and ensure good fortune. Wedding ceremonies elevated personal celebration to cosmic significance, transforming individual unions into reflections of universal harmony. The elaborate ritual of Sofre Ye'agd created a ceremonial space where everyday objects became sacred symbols. A mirror reflected the couple's faces together for the first time as husband and wife, while burning candelabras represented the fire of love that would illuminate their shared path. Sugar cones, rubbed together by married women above the bride's head, promised sweetness, while needles and colourful thread symbolized the careful work of weaving two lives into one pattern. The Persian approach to death and remembrance created its own ceremonial calendar, with specific days set aside for visiting graves and honouring ancestors. The ritual of visiting graveyards during Nowruz connected the living to the dead, ensuring that departed souls remained part of the community's ongoing story. Families brought rosewater and sweets to cemetery visits, sprinkling the fragrant water on tombstones while reciting prayers that bridged the worlds of the living and the dead. Seasonal agricultural festivals celebrated the relationship between human communities and the natural world that sustained them. The grape harvest brought communities together in vineyards, where workers sang traditional songs while filling baskets with fruit that would become wine, vinegar, and raisins. Rice harvesting in the northern provinces created its own celebrations, with entire villages participating in the careful work of cutting and gathering grain, while musicians played folk melodies that had accompanied this work for countless generations. These celebrations and ceremonies formed a continuous cycle that connected Persian communities to the rhythms of nature, the movements of celestial bodies, and the accumulated wisdom of ancestors. Each festival carried forward ancient knowledge while adapting to contemporary circumstances, ensuring that the sacred calendar remained a living tradition rather than a fossilized relic. The Persian way of celebration emphasized community over individual achievement, continuity over innovation, and the sacred nature of ordinary time transformed through ritual and attention into moments of transcendence that nourished both body and spirit through the eternal cycles of seasons and years. Through the corridors of time, where empires have risen like morning mist and dissolved into memory, the essence of Persian culture has flowed like an underground river, surfacing again and again in unexpected places, nourishing new growth even in the most barren seasons. When Alexander's armies swept across the plateau, they came expecting to find conquest, but discovered instead a civilization so deeply rooted that it transformed the conquerors themselves, weaving Persian customs into Hellenistic courts and Persian wisdom into Greek philosophy. The young Macedonian king, who had dreamed of ruling the world, found himself adopting Persian dress, Persian ceremonies, and Persian concepts of divine kingship, as if the very air of Persepolis carried within it an irresistible cultural magnetism. The gardens of Cyrus at Pasargadae continued to bloom long after the last Achaemenid king had fallen, their geometric patterns inspiring Islamic paradise gardens that would spread from Spain to India. The Persian concept of the fourfold garden, with its crossed water channels representing the rivers of paradise, became embedded so deeply in the collective imagination that it survived conquest after conquest, appearing in medieval manuscripts, Mughal palace grounds, and even in the courtyard fountains of Andalusian homes. Each conqueror who arrived believing they would reshape this ancient land found themselves instead shaped by it, their own cultural expressions gradually taking on Persian hues like silk-absorbing dye. Under the Sasanians, when Zoroastrian fire temples once again dotted the landscape, the ancient patterns reasserted themselves with quiet dignity. The court ceremonies became even more elaborate, the concept of divine kingship more refined, and the Persian language began its slow transformation from Middle Persian into the lyrical New Persian that would later give voice to Hafez and Rumi. The silver dishes of this period, with their hunting scenes and royal investiture ceremonies, carried forward artistic traditions that had been flowing beneath the surface like underground streams, emerging whenever conditions allowed them to flourish again. When Arab armies brought Islam to the plateau, they encountered not a vacuum to be filled, but a sophisticated civilization with its own concepts of monotheism, moral dualism, and cosmic justice. The Persian language, rather than disappearing, began its patient work of transformation, absorbing Arabic vocabulary while maintaining its own grammatical structure and poetic sensibilities. Persian administrators, scholars, and poets gradually became the architects of Islamic civilization itself, their cultural DNA spreading through the bureaucracies of Baghdad, the courts of Cairo, and the universities of Cordoba. The Persian concept of adab, encompassing literature, refinement, and proper conduct, became foundational to Islamic culture across 3 continents. Persian forms of poetry, particularly the ghazal and the rubai, provided the templates for love poetry from Turkey to India. The Persian mystical tradition, with its emphasis on direct spiritual experience and symbolic language, gave birth to Sufi orders that carried Persian cultural elements as far west as Morocco and as far east as Java. The Persian language itself became the lingua franca of culture and administration from Delhi to Istanbul, its verses quoted in courts where Persian blood had never flowed, but where Persian cultural values had taken deep root. During the Mongol invasions, when cities were razed and libraries burned, the keepers of Persian culture retreated like seeds buried in winter soil. In hidden valleys and remote monasteries, in the memories of traveling musicians, and in the carefully preserved manuscripts of scholarly families, the essential patterns survived. When Hulagu Khan established his capital at Maraga, Persian astronomers and mathematicians emerged from their refuges to staff his observatory. Persian administrative practices gradually reasserted themselves in Mongol courts, and Persian artistic traditions began influencing Mongol patrons who had initially scorned the culture they had conquered. The miniature paintings of this period tell their own story of cultural persistence and adaptation. Persian artists, working for Mongol patrons, began incorporating Chinese landscape elements and Mongol costume details into compositions that remained fundamentally Persian in their sense of proportion, their use of symbolic color, and their approach to narrative illustration. These hybrid works became launching points for new traditions that would flourish in the Timurid courts of Herat and Samarkand, where Persian culture experienced another of its periodic renewals. Under the Safavids, Persian identity crystallized around Shia Islam, creating a synthesis that gave the culture both religious distinctiveness and political unity. The great mosques of Isfahan, with their azure domes and intricate tile work, represented not just architectural achievement, but cultural consolidation. The Persian language, purified of excessive Arabic borrowings and enriched with new poetic possibilities, reached heights of expressiveness that would influence literature far beyond Persian-speaking lands. The concept of the perfect ruler, drawing on Zoroastrian ideals of justice, Islamic concepts of divinely guided leadership, and Persian traditions of royal magnificence, created a model that would echo through centuries. Persian cultural resilience revealed itself perhaps most remarkably in its capacity for synthesis rather than mere survival. Each new influence was not simply resisted, but absorbed, transformed, and integrated into evolving patterns that remained recognizably Persian while becoming something genuinely new. The Persian garden continued to embody paradise on earth, but its specific forms adapted to local climates and available materials. Persian poetry maintained its essential meters and forms while exploring new themes and philosophical depths. Persian concepts of hospitality, honor, and social refinement persisted while adapting to changing social structures and religious frameworks. The workshops of Kashan continued producing lustrous ceramics whose techniques had been developed over centuries, each generation of potters adding subtle innovations to inherited knowledge. The carpet weavers of Tabriz and Kerman passed down not just technical skills, but aesthetic principles that could be applied to new patterns demanded by changing tastes and export markets. The tradition of Persian calligraphy evolved to serve Arabic script while maintaining distinctively Persian approaches to balance, rhythm, and visual harmony. In the bazaars of Isfahan, Shiraz, and Tabriz, the ancient customs of commerce persisted through political upheavals that toppled dynasties and redrew borders. The tea houses remained centers of storytelling and informal education, where classical poetry was recited and traditional music performed for audiences that included merchants, craftsmen, and scholars. The Persian concept of friendship, with its elaborate courtesies and deep emotional bonds, continued to shape social relationships regardless of the official ideology of whatever government happened to be in power. Persian cultural identity demonstrated its deepest strength in its very adaptability, its capacity to flow around obstacles rather than break against them. Like water finding its way through stone, Persian cultural elements seeped through barriers, emerged in unexpected places, and nourished new growth wherever they settled. The Persian language carried Persian ways of thinking about beauty, love, loss, and transcendence to communities that had never seen the Iranian plateau. Persian architectural principles influenced buildings from the Taj Mahal to the palaces of Samarkand, creating beauty that spoke to universal human longings while maintaining distinctively Persian characteristics. As centuries passed and modern pressures mounted, the deepest currents of Persian culture continued their ancient flow beneath changing surfaces. The traditional emphasis on poetry remained strong enough that taxi drivers in Tehran could still quote Hafez, and mechanics in Mashhad still gathered for informal recitations of classical verses. The Persian gift for synthesis continued adapting ancient wisdom to contemporary challenges, finding new expressions for old truths about human nature, social harmony, and the relationship between earthly beauty and spiritual reality. In quiet moments between the noise of history, in the evening hours when the call to prayer mingles with the sound of water flowing through garden channels, in the gentle repetition of traditional crafts and the patient transmission of inherited wisdom from teacher to student, the enduring spirit of Persian culture continues its ancient work of renewal, carrying forward patterns of beauty and meaning that have enriched human civilization for thousands of years, and continue to offer their gifts to anyone willing to receive them with an open